women and art, the male gaze. Oh my god, it's so silly. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This week I want to talk about women, and I love how I start every video with I'm going to talk about women and something else, as if that's a big shocker. Every week I talk about something to do with women. So this week I am talking about women and art, and things like their representation in art, like how they are literally portrayed, like painted or sculpted or whatever. Female artists, they should just be called artists, but blah, 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 all that kind of thing. And just disclaimer before we even start this video, I am not an artist. Well, I mean, I do create some online bits, but I'm not a painter, not a sculptor. I know absolutely nothing about the art world. So I'm coming at this purely from a feminist perspective, not an artist perspective. So please go easy on me when watching this. It actually took me so long to even just like research this video. I had to just be like, Lauren, just start the video because there's so much there and I'm literally not even scratching any surface. I'm just going to be talking about it. So yeah, these are just a few bits that I came across that I think are really, really interesting from a feminist perspective. Again, as with everything I talk about, I'm just like, it's so important to talk about this stuff. So we're kind of going to talk about two things in particular. One is like the actual like pay that they receive, like the female artists, and then what kind of representation they have within like museums and exhibitions and all that kind of stuff. Like what are the kind of percentages like? I have some good stats for everybody. And then talking about then kind of more how they are actually represented in art, and you know, in particular like nude paintings and sculptures and all that kind of thing. Fascinating, and just the repercussions it has for society as a whole. So let's get started. So kind of first off, talking about pay is a huge thing. So obviously we know that there is literally a pay gap in literally every sector ever, and the art scene is no different. And this is there for, again, a couple of different reasons. It's like, one, even though they say that there are like 50% of like artist workers in the world is, you know, kind of split evenly, but we know that the representation of women artists in galleries and auctions, etc., is much lower. And so there's already less women being paid for art, and then the women that are being paid are getting paid way less. Who is shocked? Not me. So in terms of actual numbers, I have a good stat here, and it's from the National Gallery in London, and there was a study done by a women's activist, Tim Simmons, back in 2011. So some of these stats are a bit old, but this is 2011, not too bad. And there was apparently 2,300 works in the National Gallery in London. Can you guess how many of the artists were women? 11. And literally when I was researching this video, like that's like astoundingly low, but like that was not shocking considering all the other stats I'd seen. Everything was so low, the representation of women, like, oh my god. So that gives you an idea of like how bad it is. As I said, like it's hard to be paid the same as men, but it's hard to even get in to then be paid. So, like you can't even get in to have the option of your works being bought or whatever. So it's just insane. And there's a good article as well I'll post down below with some kind of further stats that know way more than me and that go into better detail. Another stat, apparently only 2 works by women have ever broken into the top 100 auction sales for paintings. So I'm guessing obviously the top 100 are like the most expensive, and only 2 paintings by women have ever broken into that, because all the rest of them are by men and they're expensive. And yeah. And what's even more interesting, and I'll talk about this a bit more later on as well, is that of those like top 100 auction sales for paintings, women made up 25% of the subject matter for the paintings. So, and this is something I'm really fascinated by, that like, it's like women were obviously like in the paintings themselves, like obviously painted by men. Women were in the paintings, but none of the women were the painters. Like it's just so silly. And then some more stats in general. So of the top 100 artists whose works, so this could be more than paintings, like sculptures, whatever. Of the top 100 artists whose works fetched the highest amounts at auction in 2017, just 13 were women. So again, so low. And that's even like broadening it out, and still only 13 of those artists were women. And at the age of 89, Japanese artist, I had never heard of her before because I'm not really into art, but she's actually apparently huge from what I've seen. Kusama Yayoi is the only living woman in the top 50 of those 100s. So everybody's just dead, and there's actually only one living woman who is like making that much money off of her art. So it's just, again, just so upsetting. And there's a part of me that's almost like, oh yay, like at least we have one. But that is just so upsetting, because literally like all the rest of them are men. It's just like, what? And from what I've seen as well, it's also really upsetting is that like obviously the wage gap is like disputed in like every industry, but there seems to be a kind of a more interesting discussion in the art industry, because it's like people make the argument like, oh, but art is so subjective, and like art is just kind of like, people just kind of decide a price for it. It could go for like, you know, €5 or like 5 million, you know what I mean? So like people are kind of seem to be using that argument when people say like, oh, there's a wage gap, like women aren't paid as much, and like, well, art's subjective, and like, you know, and it's just like no, like it's just hard to believe that when there is a wage gap in literally every other industry, and those industries aren't subjective. So it's like, maybe you need to look at what you're doing here. And yeah, again, look at the article, the artsy article I posted down below. It gives kind of more detail on the actual numbers of money that people are getting and not getting. And what's actually funny as well is that like it's not just like female artists that aren't being paid as much, it's like female art directors as well. Like it's not just artists, it's actually women in the art industry in general, like curators, directors, that kind of thing. Like it's just so insane. And again, not shocking at all for anybody who is aware of life. But again, it's just so annoying. So now I want to move on to the actual like subject matter of art pieces. And that's kind of where this idea for this, like for me to do this topic kind of came from. A lot of feminists will probably have heard, and artists as well actually, will probably have heard of the Guerrilla Girls. And basically they're this kind of like feminist activist group from like way back, and still going now, but from like the 80s and stuff, that are trying to basically fight sexism in the art world. And it was actually their stat that you've probably seen, it's quite famous, that kind of alerted me to sexism in the art world, because I never really would have thought about it before, because I'm not really into art. And it's so upsetting. So basically back in the 80s, they were asked to make a billboard for like the New York Public Art Fund or something, and obviously with feminist leanings because they're a feminist group. And they basically decided to go into the Met Museum and count how many of the artists were male or female, and then look at how many of the works featured naked women. Oh, kills me, but so interesting. They basically compared the two. They did one in 1989, 2005, and 2012, and the numbers are so embarrassing. So in 1989, the numbers were less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, 5%. But 85% of the nudes are female. So that means that the overwhelming majority of artists are male, but they're all painting female nudes. And it just, we'll get to why it grinds my gears in a few minutes. 2005, extremely similar, 3% female artists, 83% of the nudes. And then in 2012, 4% artists, 76% of the nudes. So at least we've come down a bit on the nudes, but still horrific. And the reason I just have such a problem with that is just because it's just the sheer objectification of our bodies just shining through so starkly, and it just makes me so annoyed. We are not objects for your paintings, for your work, and it's so infuriating then when you hear of like these male artists are making so much money capitalizing off of our bodies and our figures, and like that's just, aside from anything else about it just being pure objectification, it's just like you're then making money off of our bodies. Like, and it shouldn't be a shock because men make money off our bodies all the time, whether it's advertising for movies and you use a sexy girl or sex work or anything. It's just like you're just continuing to capitalize off art, like, and it's just like the sexualization of our bodies is just so like, why are they naked? Why are they naked? Why can't they be clothed? And there are so many examples of women just being naked in artwork, and the men in the artwork are fully dressed. And actually, if you've seen Hannah Gadsby's Netflix special, Douglas, she speaks on this really well. She's so funny and so fucking on it. And she speaks on this really well, and it's infuriating. And it's just like, I'm so sick of seeing women's naked bodies. Like, we are not objects. We are not, like, why are we naked all the time? Why? Like, what is the point? Particularly when it's done by men. And I'm just so, like, you see so many like album covers where it's like a male band and it's just like a female figure on the album cover. And then I even look at like the art in my house and stuff, and we have like so much art and it's just like women's bodies, and it's just like, it doesn't look that weird, but then I would love for you all to replace those with men's naked bodies and see how weird it looks. See how weird it looks to like be sexualizing a type of body. Like, why? Like, I mean, we kind of look at the female figure and we're like, oh, it's just kind of inherently sensual and the curves and blah blah blah. No, we've made it that. Like, why am I just seeing naked bodies everywhere? And it's just so sad for women and for girls, and like we grow up with seeing ourselves like that, and we're seeing ourselves through the male gaze, the male perspective, because it's men who are painting these pictures, it's men who are putting us on album covers, it's men who are, you know, putting naked women on the front of like movie ads or whatever, and we grow up thinking of ourselves as these inherently naked, sensual objects. And it's like, yeah, you can make the argument of like, oh yeah, you know, well, you can be that, that's fine, but it's like, be that for yourself. Like, be naked and be sensual for yourself. But it's impossible to truly be that when the entire world is looking at our naked bodies through the male gaze, and we ourselves internalize that and look at ourselves through the male gaze and want to please the male gaze, and that's, oh my god, infuriates me. I would just love for every naked woman everywhere to be replaced with a man and see how weird it looks, because it would look so weird. It's not normal that there are just pictures of naked women everywhere. It infuriates me if you can't tell. And just like some examples of like just not even naked women, but just women in general being the subject of art by men. Hello, Mona Lisa. Like, woman subject, male artist. He is very famous. He's made loads of money. Hello, girl with the pearl earring. And again, I'll put pictures in here for people that don't know. Like, again, capitalizing off just women. The Birth of Venus is another very famous painting. Again, hello, just nakedness. And then Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe painting. Like, again, she's a whole other thing used for her body and her face, and then he's famous and he's made millions and she's dead. So what do we think about that? I could honestly talk about that all day and just the objectification of women and just using us for our bodies, but I will stop now. But one thing I did want to talk about was, so obviously those stats by the Gorilla Girls were of the Met, and basically last October the Met had kind of a huge change or whatever, and obviously was seeing the way the world was going and was seeing how bad its stats were in terms of like male and female artists, so wanted to change, blah blah blah, and they made this huge thing about it. They were like, you know, like, we're so, you know, with the times, we're including more women, we're becoming more equal, blah blah blah. And it's just like, there are so many criticisms that you could make of it. Obviously on the surface, yeah, that looks great and it's good to be having conversation, and yeah, but let's look at some of the facts. So first of all, one of the things they did was they expanded the space by 30%. I just find that really, really interesting, because it's like, in a way I'm kind of like, well, so you expanded it by 30% and I presume you added, you know, more kind of like female and maybe more like artists of color and stuff, and you know, different countries and backgrounds into that 30%. But I'm wondering, from the original 100%, did you take down any artists by, like, let's say, I don't know, white males? I really would love to know, and I don't have the numbers on that. I just think it's kind of interesting. Like, why didn't you just like keep the space and just replace white straight male artists with like diverse artists? I find that interesting. It's not, like, obviously I get like make the most of your space, brilliant, cool, but I just think it's interesting to think about that. Like, why didn't they just keep the space they've obviously had for like ever, and just replace? I would love to know how many people were actually replaced and whether other ones were just added in, because then it doesn't actually lower the male percentage at all, and it just kind of increases the female one a little bit. But yeah, I would love to know. I'll try and find out. I don't know. They also said that it would change, like the curation or whatever of the museum will change every 6 months. So yeah, hopefully that will be a good thing. I don't know. So they now say that 28% of the works on show are now by women, but something I've seen is that like it's quite small when you take into account the fact that 13% can't neatly be assigned to a gender. And that could be, for example, because they're part of like a collective or something, where there maybe is like, it's like a collective where there's both men and women kind of thing. So I think like they're obviously, if it's a collective and there's like even like, you know, one woman involved in that collective, they're then including that as part of the stat, even though it's not the woman on her own. So again, it's kind of interesting. So it's like, you know, it's not actually, like, still 28% is still violently low. Anyway, even if they were all female, and then taking into account the fact that they're actually not all female, there's probably a lot of men in there too because of it's collective or whatever. So that is just, again, it's so silly. But obviously comparing it with the like 5%, 4%, 3%, whatever, as before, it is higher. So hopefully with time it will increase, blah, blah, blah. One good thing is that I think they're making more of an effort to include female nudes, but by female artists and not just by male artists. So again, yeah, you know, I could make an argument about, you know, being naked in general, but I won't. But it is good that, you know, they're having more female nudes through the female gaze and through people who actually have those bodies and know what it's like to go through the world in that body every day. And hopefully they're less sexualized and they're just being in their womanly bodies. There's also just been, you know, a lot of criticism of just tokenism, which is totally fair. You know, there probably was that, just, you know, putting in a black woman artist here, putting in, you know, like a non-English speaking artist here or whatever, you know, just to be like, oh yeah, we're diverse. I'm sure that's there, but it's a start, and hopefully after a while there won't need to be any for tokenism. But yeah, it's just like, it's just that age-old argument of like, are they being put there just because they're, you know, like a black woman or whatever, or oh, they're not actually good, they're just there because they're a black woman, like, you know. So that's not great, but it is interesting to talk about. I'm just gonna leave it there. There is so much to talk about. As I said, I barely know anything about the subject, but I think it's super, super interesting, and we should all go like digging more into the art world and women representation in the art world. I'll leave some links down below with some more information, but I hope you've enjoyed this video. If any people who know stuff have any more interesting facts for me, leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe and give a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and want to see more. And I will see you all in next week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye!